Welcome back to Do the Work. My name is Ari Davachi. This is a bit of a different start for us. You now know a lot about me, frankly, more than I thought you would know about me, more than I would ever publicly say about me. Um, but that's how much my AI model knows about me because I've been talking to it for the last 6 or 7 months and I pay for it. So that's how much it knows about me. That's how much it knows about Do the Work because that's how much is online and I only asked for a few sentences. I didn't ask about these two wonderful folks who are with me because I want to ask them to tell you about who they are. So I'm going to come to John first. John, welcome to Do the Work. Can you tell folks a bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks. I'm John Hackett. I'm based in Brooklyn, and I work at a company called Huge. We're a design and technology company, and we build products and services for companies. Some of our clients are Google, Nike, NBC, McDonald's. I'm gay, and he, him.
Thank you. Welcome. Kenna, coming to you next.
Thank
Welcome
you.
to the work.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kenna, pronouns they, them. I am queer in the general sense, but if you want specifically, genderqueer. I'm not even going to unpack that, but I am founder and head of research for a company called Apple Juice. You can find us at applejuice.wtf. We are a strategy shop, small but mighty, and we work pretty much uncovering cultural insights and doing brand campaigns to brand positioning. And we work globally, but specifically are based within the United States, but work a lot with Mexico. So actually, I'm currently in Mexico.
Welcome both to Do the Work. For those watching, I guess you may have guessed by now, we're here to talk about AI. We're here to talk about the relationship between AI and queer representation, because that is what Do the Work is about, queer representation in marketing and advertising, as ChatGPT alluded to and spoke to in its two-sentence summary of Do the Work. I want to start by just sort of table setting. You more or less just watched my relationship with AI. That is my relationship with AI is I talk to it on the internet. I talk to it in my house. I talk to it through here. That is my relationship with AI. I don't use AI in my day-to-day work. I'm a production lead at a live entertainment company. I don't ask it to make production plans or anything like that. But you two do use AI. You have different relationships. So I would love, John, I imagine you have a very intense relationship with AI. So can you just like summate briefly for us what your relationship with AI is?
Yeah. So my background is software engineering, and I'm a vice president of technology, and so I oversee AI and machine learning for the company, but more so in building it into products or services we're building for our clients, right? So the either as like an extension of what the product is, or it's the whole thing. For instance, I worked on the NBC Olympics AI bot for the Summer Olympics, and we're in process of talking about what to do with the Winter Olympics. But that was a chat-based system that could communicate with their services and figure out you want to watch like Simone Biles, when is she on, and it could find you the right programming for that. But yeah, in my day to day, I'm like building these things, but I'm also using these tools quite a bit for help with code, for help with writing. Across the company, we also use it in different ways to help with the creative process in terms of getting to ideas or synthesizing ideas, and then even the visual tools a lot of people use for the creative process to kind of get mood boards or inspiration for different campaigns or ideas we're working on.
Cool. The verb you mostly use is you use it.
Yeah.
Okay. Kenna, what is your relationship with AI?
That's also super user pretty much. So I was I don't want to say one of the first, but I was early in on being somebody that was using different bots, but specifically ChatGPT. Some of this has to do with my co-founder, who's also very tech obsessed. So I would love to say that I'm the one that discovers everything, and I'm like reading all the newspaper or articles online of what to use. But he's like he's always like, let's try this one, let's try this one. So getting in with ChatGPT very early on and having a paid model, making our own what they call they call GPTs. I call them my little chatbots. So I program little chatbots for me to work with. But I would say consistently ever since I had access to technology, from the early age of like 10, having a computer, I've been actively trying to figure out how technology can work with my brain. So I, like, in terms of daily use, I don't necessarily ask ChatGPT or any other AI, how do I cook dinner? But I'm constantly asking it to correct my grammar and spelling, as easy as that, to then being like, help me brainstorm. Here's the brief. Here's the things that I'm reading. Help me synthesize this. What am I missing? What am I doing wrong? So I'm like constantly just using it as my little, I guess, sidekick, fact check, little thing in my ear being like, have you thought of this?
So and listen, I know I'm like getting into like literally like the word usage, but you use the verb of like working, like you're working with it. Different
Yes.
than John, who's using it, different than I am talking to it, right? And that's the different types of relationships that we have with AI, right? And I remember last week, John, when we were doing the pre-production for this call, we sort of did the very different experience of ChatGPT that I pulled up, and we were talking to it, and I was talking to it, and you had some thoughts about ChatGPT, and since then I've been thinking about it. I've been looking at the responses I get from ChatGPT. Can you talk to us about ChatGPT and like the model and sort of why it comes out like that and what it is that makes it like that and what that is, the sort of tenor, if you will, of its voice?
Yeah. I'll try to break this down
Yeah.
quickly and not dive too deep into it. I'd say number one, the thing that is underpinning everything is the model right behind it, and you hear them switch that out every now and then. And that the model is made up of them basically hoovering up literally everything on the internet they possibly can and putting that into this very expensive model that is sort of powers the behind the scenes, which is roughly based on the patterns of like the same patterns that neural pathways use in your brain, right? So like the way that you free think, it kind of has a similar way it works except it has the entire memory of the internet all at once, right? And so that's where when you ask it something, it will basically it's predicting based on everything in the internet, what is the smartest result for what you've just asked it. And a lot of what it gives you can be really bland depending on how, I think that's what we talked about this last week. You can get very bland, very generic, very safe answers from it very easily. And that's because it's like the average of everything on the internet, right? Unless you give it guidance or tuning, like, kind of mentioned the GPTs are a way you can get really specific and kind of narrow in. And you mentioned earlier, like you have a pro account where it has history and it remembers things about. You've probably told it stuff that it's like keeps in its memory bank. And so
Well, yeah, it just essentially just doxed me in front of the entire world.
basically, and so like if you have the right features turned on and you're using it in the right way, it can kind of get pretty more narrow and specific. But if you ask very big, lofty questions, it's going to give you very vanilla kind of the average of everything on the internet answers. And some of the tricks to get around that are, giving it like insanely long, detailed, like, prompts, right? That give a ton of context, or you're cutting and pasting in a lot of information. You can add files, that like, hey, this research paper or these items are things I want you to consider when you answer me. Or you make an assistant or a GPT, and there's different ones of those for the different platforms. Or you use a custom tool. There's a bunch of tools outside of ChatGPT also that like can give you more power. And it's really like the more guidance you give it, the more specific and more like focused the answers will be that it comes back with.
And look, the reason I ask is not like I know like I come off incredibly naive because like I don't use it every day, right? Like in the way that you use it. But the thing is like I think that I represent the mass majority of the world in terms of the AI usage, right? Like I think a majority of people are using it the way that I'm using it. And what's interesting is like if the response that it's giving to me is the sort of expected sort of like baseline level, it's like then like why should we use it, right? Like what is the purpose of it if it's just giving us these sort of baseline things that it's not particularly doing anything that a Google search can't really do, right? Like it's just sort of giving us the same output, except it's like utilizing more energy and like carbon output. You know what I mean? Kate, like kind of what do you think?
Sorry, I do want to say, yes, while we're not going to talk about the output, the energy output right now, absolutely, it is actually a really big environmental crisis and issue, and using it every day is probably pretty detrimental. So parking that, I just didn't want to ignore that fact because
Yeah.
it is truthful. Parking that fact, what does it do outside that is greater than Google? John, I'm sure you can speak to it being like, well, you have you have all these different platforms that you can use, and obviously how they're programmed determines how good they are. So I always think back to when the internet just started coming out and all the different search engines on the internet. And I hope like some people here are like, what, huh? It's like before Google existed, we had Ask Jeeves and we had Mad Dog and we had all these different types of search engines that were all like, this one's good for this type of searching. This one's good for academia. This one's good for searching just, group chats on the internet from back in the day. And that's how I always think of AI in general. Like
Mm.
ChatGPT is really good at spiders crawling across the internet and pulling in sources. And then half of those links being broken and not working and actually giving you incorrect information. They cannot do math well. Just side caveat, they're really bad at doing math. Where other sources will be like Claude is better at maybe writing things for you. And so you don't want to ask it about the internet and the internet of things and pulling sources for you. So I would say what it does well is it reads the entire internet and can synthesize and pull things down into really concise thought, or broad, but like concise of like, these are things that like we have decided that the internet says this about this subject, just so you know. Where am I going? So I think it's better than Google in that way, because in
Right.
Google, you're still combing through everything, even though they have introduced their own AI. I think their AI is maybe one of the worst of the group. Getting better, but one of the worst.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've done the table setting. I feel like I needed that. Sorry. Like I just feel like
No.
when I'm talking to experts, I need to meet you there because I'm not an expert. I'm just a queer person who's like trying to learn. So I feel like I'm at the table now with you. And now I need to ask you the things that concern me as a queer person who like is in this industry, right? So Kenna, in my stalking of you on the internet, I saw that you say that you're obsessed with emerging technology. How does queerness and emerging tech intersect in a way that's worth being obsessed with?
Ooh. That I think this is one of the best questions ever. And it has to do with queerness. So technology aside, we are always advancing with technology. And John, maybe you're like, no, we're not, or maybe you agree with me, jump in. But we're always moving forward is how I see it. Like from Stone Age to getting fire to cars, like that is, I don't want to say it's human nature, but this is how we function. So from a human perspective, I love emerging technology because we will always be moving forward, and technology is part of that exchange. As a queer person, this is where I think it gets exciting. As a queer person looking at queer people across the globe, we are, I would say culturally, maybe this is simplifying, but culturally, we are very innovative. Some of this, I think, is socially, we have to be innovative because in a lot of spaces we can't see ourselves. We don't see ourselves. There isn't representation. Actually, I would say most places there isn't a pathway forward. I didn't see another genderqueer person growing up. The closest I had was seeing trans women in the world because I was enough to grow up in Venice Beach and there were visible trans women in the world. But that wasn't my one-to-one path. So I would say there's an inherent innovative spirit and mindset or mindset within the queer community globally, but getting more pinpointed down. There's a lot of, I don't want to say it's genetic or inherent, but there's a lot of conversation about breaking binaries and what does it mean to live outside the binary. And that is where I think queer people and technology really fuse because we're bringing a different perspective that a lot of people just have never been exposed to when they follow a tech path, when they follow any path, but when they follow a tech path. And that is, so breaking the binary, like different types of critical thought, critical theory coming into this tech space that really allows for innovation to unlock. You look at, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name. The guy that cracked the Enigma, Alan Turing. Like there's one example of that to also Sam Altman, who is part of the founding of ChatGPT. Like when you think of queer people within the space of technology, I do think it's how do we approach things differently? That's just naturally inherent to the queer community. There's more levels to unpack, but I also want to be like, hey, John, what do you think?
Yeah, totally.
No, I'm also very pro technology, despite, with the sweet comes the sour as well, right? There's always an upside and a downside, right? I think, I've always been attracted to it as well, because I think I'm always interested in what's the next thing or how it's going to change society or shift how we think about things. And I think that like AI is particularly interesting in that it sort of there's a lot of interesting questions, right? I think the discourse around it is fascinating. It's right, like the structure of society, will that have to change as these things get more prevalent? Will, work is obviously going to, change over time in significant ways. And I think it's an interesting facilitator. I also think that it depending on who's at the wheel, it kind of molds itself towards whoever it's talking to, right? So it sort of reflects whoever it's communicating with if you're being expressive, which is, I think, an interesting type of technology that can be more wholly representative if you are like asking for it, the way that you're communicating with it, which I think is really interesting.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Mm-hmm.
You say that it changes based on who it's talking to, but can it also change based on who is, and can it be set based on who created it? Theoretically, like I'm just thinking like in both directions, right? Both in like the utopian and the dystopian. Like theoretically,
Yeah, it could cut either way, right? Depending on who's at the wheel, right? If you're making these things, and this is something that will definitely happen, and there are folks out there working on ones that have nefarious sort of points of view or mindsets, particularly given the cultural climate right now in the United States. There are definitely companies playing around with making these things that aren't woke, right? Or, we've seen some of the fallout like with ones that are like too representative in weird situations, with prompts people had, and then that caused like a weird Republican backlash around the model. There's also the alternative of that, where it was making really poor choices of representation with, I think it put Nazis in something it shouldn't have. Like there's it's not quite getting that. So I think like there's that, but you can also program ones that have a point of view, right? So you could make one that you tune and train, to better understand queer culture or a particular variant of it. And you could use a lot of writing or information or just prompting that gives it a direction. Like I was actually working on one not long ago that from a brand point of view, we were guiding it to be genderless, right? And not really use pronouns, which was an interesting, direction coming from a client. And I really liked that was baked into how we were guiding it on how to talk to people, right? Because it you know, it doesn't inherently have a gender. Why should it, right? It was an interesting conversation we got into. Yeah.
It is true. Yeah, tech, it's an object, right? Like not a person. But I love what you just said. It's how it's programmed. And I think coming back down to that, like who who is the human behind it is so important in every way, actually, not in so many ways, in every way, because it is the language we use to create these things is what the people using it will experience. And as I would say, as a person that likes to think that society will eventually or is always getting better, like slowly but surely, even in the darkest of hours, like now, when queer people are at the forefront or like diverse voices are at the forefront of it, it will inherently force society to keep learning and having an education that is an input of so much more, and therefore it's a better growth model, like will create better growth ways. But yeah, exactly what you just said, John, like, oh, it can absolutely be turned for evil and be programmed in ways that only show the worst of the worst of thinking or limited ways of thinking. So that is so important to always weigh and and know to look into for technologies like this.
So as it pertains to like the actual representation of queer people, the two things that come to mind for me that I think the general things that come to mind for me when it comes to AI is like obviously the ethical nature of it, and then also the accuracy. I'm going to start with accuracy because I feel like accuracy is the thing that we've come to sort of like be like, oh yeah, it's not that accurate. Like when I autofill a thing on Photoshop, it's like, well, yeah, that guy has 6 fingers. You know what I mean? Or like, like you just said, kind of like when you send stuff out or when it does math, it's wrong.
So
And so
wrong.
like, you know what I mean? Like we've come to kind of understand that it's going to be wrong or that it's going to make mistakes. That's
Mhm.
worrisome to me when we're talking about representation. Make me feel better about it.
Mm. Mm. I think that's sort of the right now. I'd say some of this is the limitations of the technology at the moment, right? And
Right.
I think there's a lot going on that I still almost think that this is kind of like really early days. Like it's like, first version of Google search engine, right? Back in the day, or early or first month that an iPhone is out, right? And we're all trying to figure out, what that means for the internet. So I think that there's a lot, like I would just say, a big part of right now is knowing that this is still very experimental, and ChatGPT in my mind is almost like an experiment someone slapped a little bit of UI on, put it on the internet, and it just happened to take off. And that's kind of what everybody's doing right now. So I think it's early, it's not mature. So I think a lot of the problems with accuracy are related to maturity. But there's also underpinning the technology is it's more of like a right brain tech than a left brain tech, right? Like it's more creative in its nature, right? Because it's generating something out of nothing based on a vast amount of data that it's kind of trying to look like something that it's seen before, right? Which is much more of a creative process. So I think there's like that balance is tricky, and I think when we're using it right now, you have to keep that in mind. It's like use it for creative opportunity, use it for, but double check what it's doing. It's like a good starting place, but it's not necessarily the end. And I think the left brain stuff is going to come later. There's some interesting work that's going on right now that I think like it's not going to be that far away, to be honest. I think it's going to get a lot better at accuracy, but I think there's also a little bit as a user, I think they need to do a better job of telling people it's being creative or it's being deterministic and like this is the one answer, right? Because Google is like often very deterministic. It's like this is the thing you asked for exactly, right? And the one thing or a rank of things that are that thing, right? And I think these things need to do, I think, a little bit better at like telling you when it's creative or not. And the other interesting thing is some of them you can pop the hood and change that and set it to like zero creativity. And I've done that on a few things, and then it is very much like the answer is this is the only answer. It's not going way off into outer space. I I think there's ways to get there. It's just it takes a lot more effort on the user, and I think it's also the products aren't as mature as they will be in the future.
Okay, so patience. I just have patience.
Yeah, just chill out. Just
It's really
relax.
hard. It's really hard to be patient. Okay, I'm not used to it. I'm a
No,
millennial. It's difficult.
but it's a good question because it's also thinking through, like we were talking about a little earlier, what are you using it for? And then John, as you're putting, like, is it this creative output? So like I don't use it to develop images. Like every once in a while, maybe I'll go in and use a different platform to be like, how do I do this type of image? Or I need this really quickly to fill out a page on a keynote or something. Or how do I do a quick video? I would say I'm not an expert there, nor do I choose to be an expert there, because at the end of the day, I'm a strategist and researcher. And what I use it for is truly trying to synthesize and get at, actually trying to see how my brain's thinking, because sometimes I think too fast and I need somebody else to say it for me to be like, that's what I meant. So but that's, I also think, incredibly dangerous when we're starting to look at personas in advertising. A lot of companies are like, hey, we need to target, well, we have multiple targets, but we'll get as deep and down into like, this is what our persona looks like. Her name is Sharon. She is 45. She is Black. She shops at Target. She has 3 kids and she has a law career and loves it. And she lives in the suburbs. And you're like, oh, cool. Thank you, Target. Sorry, I'm using Target because it's top of mind with the boycotts right now. Costco. Thank you, Costco, for giving me your audience. And as a strategist, I'm supposed to take it and be like, this is a representation of all these people we've talked to get to the key points that are their motivators for why they purchase at a store. I experimented for a while being like, what if we took these personas and we then could program these personas into a chatbots, and then I could talk to my different personas. I will tell you that is not just dangerous, that was very reckless. And it was reckless because it's like saying you're not going to necessarily get to like racial caricatures, or in this case like queer caricatures, but just like movies, you do get to, this is that person, this is Monica from Friends, this, like, and it is not an accurate representation of all people, or of and having conversations with them, they'll be giving you answers that could be determined at, or not determined, could be understood as finite decisions or answers of this is what people believe, rather than this is what this chatbot that was programmed with this very specific information has decided is the correct answer. And that's why I'm saying it's reckless and people should not do that, because you're just going to get this one-dimensional, not two-dimensional, three-dimensional representation of people. And that's where I think it can be incredibly scary. And also, speaking of queerness, you become very much like the caricature of what is gay and what is queer and what is this. Like, yeah, you can get to that, but so can shows like Amelia Perez. So, like, this is why I'm like, I'm pro technology, because I'm like, we need to keep pushing it. And as John, you said, we're in the infancy of AI, but it does keep exploding.
It brings me to the next thing, which is the ethical conversation. Which, my thing is there an ethical conversation to be had around AI and representation, or is it kind of too late, given that like AI is integrated? Like everyone's using it. Like, my grandma uses AI. Like, it's over. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you reach a point where the saturation is so deep into society, at least Western American society, that you're sort of like, well, you can't take it back now. Like, it's like the cat's out of the bag now. And like, that person who's programmed it has programmed it, So until the next big thing comes around. So, it was nice to hear that there's change coming, like new programs are going to come in, like maybe in 5 years, no one will be using ChatGPT anymore, and there'll be the new thing. But is there a conversation that we can still have around the ethics of AI?
I think it's still pretty relevant. I think there's many dimensions to it, right? I think that there's like, there's all the litigation going on around fair use, right, used to train the model, right? So there's a lot of trickiness there around, if you're doing something like I do a lot of these projects that are for a client. If I'm building something that people are experiencing out in the real world that is trained on material that is not ethically okay, that's a big question mark. That was like a little bit of a concern I think some folks have around that DeepSeek model that came out not too long ago. It's like, where did they get the data that's in it? OpenAI is in hot water with the New York Times. Some of the generative visual models are in trouble with different artists where they basically you can basically churn out like tons of work that looks just like someone's work, right? And I think there's multiple dimensions. I think it's the model, what are the ethics of the model that's being used? Is it representative? Is it using material that it really doesn't have fair use of? And then I think the inputs and the outputs are another angle of ethics, right? Are you asking it in an ethical way to produce something for you, right? And this is something we guide people about at work. Like, if I'm asking it to create something that looks like someone's artwork, I'm then not being ethical because I'm directing it to do something that is incorrect. I'm directing it to like copy someone or represent someone in a way that maybe is a caricature from a script or something that we're writing that maybe isn't a great idea. So there's a lot you have to think about around like the prompt that you're putting in, and is that like ethical? Like if someone asked for the receipts, would you be above reproach the way you wrote that? And then the other angle is like the output. Is what it produced ethical, right? Like the thing we talk about is if it looks like a celebrity, then that celebrity can sue you for, basically however you went about like maybe manipulating it to look like them. If it's close enough, they can sue you. If it looks like a product or a company or an entity out in the world or somebody's artwork, that's not ethical either. And then is it also like when it's consumed by, put out into the world or manipulated in whatever way before you should never really just straight up take anything AI creates and just put it out in the world. But if you modify it, is it still representing things correctly? Is it right what you've produced, even if you're legally not at fault? So I think about it in that multidimensional way, and it's a lot. Like, and none of these tools really give you a whole lot of great guidance on this stuff either. You have to learn it.
But that could be the, I guess, quote unquote scary part, because so my dad's in his 80s, and whenever I'm over at their house, which is a lot, having dinner, my dad's always like, Alexa, blah, 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 whenever we have a question about anything. And I should say my dad like really inspired me in technology. He's the one that, got the computer into the house when we were kids. But he's even asked me about AI, because he's like, wait, how did it get to that answer? Like, what does it mean and do? And things like that. And I would say, even he is 80 and he is not the typical 80-year-old, right? But he's a typical 80-year-old in the sense that he wants technology to make his life better. And it does. It reminds him to do things. Or my parents love to watch The View, so it reminds them to watch The View. Like, their entire house is a smart house. But to talk about like the ethics behind it, even looking at, say, like NFTs, you don't really own them because you don't own the technology that it's actually on. Like, all of these things are, I would say, not issues, but topics that need much more in-depth conversation around. They're obviously going to need a lot more legislation around on a global scale, not just on a country by country scale. But it is, John, what you said, the input and the output of like the person, the human user, but the training on that, right? Like, that's a huge critical piece that's missing, because I don't think schools are training people. I don't think schools are training kids on how to do it. I haven't been trained on it as somebody that's had, jobs in agencies before. It's on me to seek it out, and not to bring it back to queerness, but I do think a lot of queer people have critical thinking, or that's, I'm not going to say more expansive than the general population, but we're forced to, because we're searching our identity. So I would like to believe that the queer community is a little bit better about talking about the ethics of these things behind it and trying to educate themselves on it. So that's a little hopeful of like maybe talking about representation in AI and what it means, like being able to be critical thinkers that really are on the forefront pushing it, I think will change how our representation is in the actual output of this technology.
Okay, this brings me to my big question, which is whether or not we think AI will ever be able to let's not say will ever, because we don't know where this is going. I don't like that kind of hypothetical because we don't know. As of right now, do you think AI understands what it means to be queer or gay or whatever you are?
So I asked ChatGPT and Claude if I was gay today, just for this. I was like,
Just you,
hey,
they asked if you were, you asked
yeah.
if you were gay. Okay.
Yeah, I typed it. I was like, hey, am I queer? And both of them pretty much gave me the exact same blanket explanation, being like, I can't answer that. There's a range of identity, and like you can explore this, and here's some resources if you want to look into what that could mean for you. And then it said, but both of them, which I found was interesting, and this was ChatGPT and Claude .ai, at the end said, but if you're asking this question, maybe this is something you want to look into further, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, that's
And
nice.
yeah, like, yeah, if I'm prompting the question, maybe there's something to the question. But do I think it knows or understands the experience? I don't think technology truly can. Well, I don't think we're at a place where technology can really understand sexuality or orientation or even love, because it barely understands humor, like so I don't think it has the complexity yet built like that we've been able to build into it. But I think it understands the theoretical concept that people are diverse from a gender spectrum and a sexual orientation spectrum and a love spectrum. But it's a really good question. Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, or I think so. I don't know. John, you're making a genderless robot.
I think, I think it's hoovered up, it's sucked up everything on the internet, right? I think it has a sense of how to generally give guidance on what it doesn't really think, right? I think it can tell you what the elements are, right, that make up the perception of that by humans because it's read all that stuff, right? And I think that's about as close as it is right now. It's consumed all the writing that exists that's out there from folks who have tried to capture what it means philosophically, right? Because that's basically philosophy is all it's got, right? Like, and it can parrot that back to you in an eloquent way. And if you guide it, it might give you something that's a little bit sharper or more specific from an author or someone that like had a more pointed thought on that on identity, right? But I don't, yeah, it doesn't really understand like anything. It's just representative of a mapping of all that information, right? In similar to how like people think about things. Like when you think about a thought, it's clustered with a bunch of other ideas. It's there. So I think it could give someone who doesn't understand that maybe a good understanding of where someone who identifies that way thinks. So I think it could be effective in at least expressing that in a way that maybe someone who isn't very eloquent or has the words or has the variety of viewpoints, may not perfectly give a great answer to an individual on that, depending on where they are. But I think it could help someone understand the viewpoint there. But I don't think it really understands it. And I don't think it's an interesting question because philosophically, it's like, will these things actually ever understand what it's like to be alive and the lived experience? And that's like maybe one day, I don't know. Like it depends on how sophisticated these things get and how fast, right? Like, yeah, I don't know. It starts to beg the question of like consciousness and like what it is to be.
Yeah,
And Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is because I am 100% certain that right now, this week, or at some point in the last 2 weeks, there was a creative director, copywriter, art director who asked an AI model about queerness in relation to an ad campaign that's going to run in June for Pride. Like, this is why I
Ooh.
ask, is because like I know this is the time of year where
Hmm.
we at ad agencies are being asked to create Pride campaigns. And someone somewhere was like, what does it mean for queer people right now? And what does it mean to be queer right now? And so these models are like shooting out answers and shooting out like these realities of what it means to be queer. And for me, I'm like, okay, so how do you get that? Like, what is your understanding, ChatGPT, of what it means to be queer? And how is that in relation to like our literal three human experiences of being queer? And if that thing doesn't understand, then like
Yeah.
what are we doing? You know what I mean? Like
I
it is
mean,
informing. Because like you see what I mean? Like I can see how that thing's response is going to affect how straight people see the three of us in the world. And that
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a real, you're right. Someone stupid somewhere is doing something like that, right? Although I would, also
and
say,
also, John, like I don't know if they're even stupid. Like it's not even stupidity. It's just like I'm gonna ask AI to help me do my job. Because
yeah,
that's what we do.
but I do think it's kind of reusing Kenna's word reckless. Like it's
Reckless.
reckless. It's
Reckless.
it's 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 malpractice, right? Like I think as a creative director, you should know better than to not actually get something in front of the target audience and get feedback from it before it goes out. But we all know that that happens, right? I mean, we've also seen some pretty, cringy pride stuff over the last few decades, as is without the help of AI, right? I think
Right.
people are still going to make missteps. I think this may change the stakes for the scale and how ridiculous you can go with certain missteps. But someone will do that. I hope they don't, but it's human behavior. I would hope that somebody in involved in that would at least be like, hey, let's ask someone in the target audience, which I think is still something you have to do. Like, you can't just build these things and throw them out into the world and not focus group or test things. Like, you still need humans to look at stuff to qualify, um, whether or not it's legible or offensive or valuable, right? Like, and I'd still say like traditional advertising has also had problems with that stuff without AI. We've all seen things that just don't make any sense. So yeah, someone's going to do that though.
But no, someone has already done that. Absolutely. Hands down. Yes. And I think from a strategist point of view, I know the budgets are getting smaller and smaller and people are demanding briefs faster and faster and faster, which is not helpful for anybody because then they're like, oh, desk research, I'll just use ChatGPT or whatever AI I have access to quickly do this because I don't have time or capacity to actually go out and talk to people, to actually sit down and read the articles. I need it fast. And that scares me because I think that plays so much into why people feel they can just go to AI and ask them questions like, hey, gay people exist. What do we do for pride? And hopefully the AI bots, comes back and like, actually, please read some articles and like understand the nuances and context of what's going on in the world. You would hope that would be the output, but once again, it's whoever programs it gets to make that narrative. I would say on the flip side, though, one thing that I was inspired by, even though it came out of a bad situation, is the last year there was a couple campaigns that people were like, hey, this is incredibly racist and racist towards Black people. It's an anti-Black campaign. And I'm not even going to say which campaigns because they don't deserve to get any airspace. However, there was a ChatGPT written that was literally created to test run or test your creative through to then say, judge how it could be viewed through a racial lens in the world. And literally, like, the fastest gut check, is this racist? And somebody ran those ads through that, and the chat GPT or yeah, I think it was a chat GPT specifically said, yes, it is. And here is why. And it gave the nuances of why. And the people that programmed it, or the person that programmed it, obviously was very thoughtful in how they went about creating this GPT. But it was also, I want to say, through an American lens, right? And one of these campaigns was an English campaign. So I want to say there's an interesting, good flip side of saying it can be the fastest gut check for people that just truly have a hard time understanding an audience, or have no proximity to that audience and don't have the luxury to test, don't have the luxury to go out of their way to talk to somebody, go out of their way, no, sorry, it shouldn't be going out of their way to talk to a target audience. And it could be a really nice, I would say, low cost way to get clients who also don't have that education or culture within their brand, in their company, get them to see why certain things could be issues. So I want to say there's positive to it, but yeah, the negative is just going on blah, 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 and then not researching any further and completely creating a mockery of themselves by creating really horrendous advertising, particularly around pride. But yes, we also do that without technology very well.
We don't need tech's help.
We don't need tech's help to
Do something
be,
crazy anyway.
yeah. But it is
Yeah.
all about proximity, right? Like proximity, the input, the output, and creating the space for everybody to have that input, to make those, yeah, creating the space that I don't want to say creating safe space, but creating space that is safe, that everybody's voice is fully part of the conversation. You should be doing that as an agency, as a brand, and as a AI.
Also, if you need help doing that, you can call Do the Work. That is like literally why we're here. Which is a great moment to end on. Friends, this is a conversation I could truly have forever. We are planning to do a part 2 of this conversation later this year, which I'm super excited about, because who even knows where we will be later this year with AI. Before we go, I would love for you both to let people know where they can get into contact with you. Can you remind folks kind of what is the best way for folks to get into contact with you and Apple Juice, please?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me, I would say, is LinkedIn. I overly post because, overly sharing is overly caring. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Kenna Stout, KENNASTOUT. And then Apple Juice, you can go to our website. It's very, I would say, minimal, and you can shoot us a message through our website, and it is applejuice.wtf. So one word, yeah, applejuice.wtf.
Thank you. John, where can people get into contact with you? And if they have questions, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'd say LinkedIn is best. I basically not really into any of the other social apps these days. So I'd say find me on LinkedIn. I'm usually very responsive on there. And then I guess the other place is, if you want to reach out, you can always go to our website, which is hugeinc.com. And on there, you can find contact details to get a hold of me as well.
Incredible. And if you are watching and you are interested in Do the Work, you can reach us at dothework.com. If you're interested in talking to me, you can also find me on LinkedIn. You will find me literally nowhere else. I do not exist anywhere else, because that game is over for me. If you're interested in talking to me about my day job and not my day job, you can find me at Cape Creative. Friends, thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot about AI, and I feel like a little bit better about it. So thank you for the time.
Good.
Thank you for the work you're doing. Appreciate you. We are excited to continue this conversation later this year. And thank you for being part of Do the Work.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I enjoy this.
I'm glad.
Yeah, thank you for creating this, hosting this. Thank you to Do the Work. This is amazing.
Thanks, friends. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye.